From the cloudy Copenhagen, welcome to the webinar Incorporating Energy Service Companies' Nationally Determined Contributions, hosted by Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. My name is Aris. I'm working as a program officer at the Copenhagen Center, and I will be here for today's webinar and act as a moderator. A couple of things before we move to the main content of our webinar. The webinar is going to be about 60 minutes long, including time for Q&A at the end. In case you cannot stay until the end or want to get back to our presentations, all the materials and the recording of the whole webinar will be available online in a few days on the Copenhagen Center Knowledge Management System. And we have many other webinars and information there. Have a look. I'll give you more information in a few minutes. Now, before we start discussing about today's webinar, I would like to inform our attendees that we comply with the General Data Protection Act, also known as GDPR. This means that your personal data, such as name, email, workplace, etc., is safely processed and stored, and all of your rights pursuant to the GDPR are respected. You have full access to the data being processed about you, and at any time, you can request that inaccurate data be deleted or rectified. For access or further information, please contact with the people that are presented here. A few things about the Copenhagen Center. The Center conducts research and advisory activities in the field of energy efficiency and serves as energy efficiency hub for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The Center has an established network of global, regional, and national partners with a broad range of stakeholders to help accelerate the implementation of energy efficiency activities. On a regular basis, the Copenhagen Center is conducting webinars. All materials, including recordings and presentations from previous webinars, can be found on Copenhagen's Knowledge Management System under the e-learning section. The material of today's webinar will be uploaded shortly, but until then, you can check out of the many webinars in various topics that have been published. Now, I would like to briefly introduce the speakers of today's webinars. Søren is working as senior economist at the UNEP-DTU partnership. He has a PhD in climate policy with experience from 10 years of service in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Pierre is the president of Econoler. He has 35 years of experience in the clean energy sector within the design, financing, implementation, and monitoring of energy efficiency and renewable energy projects in North America and internationally. Alex is the co-chair of Asia Pacific ESCO Industry Alliance. For the last 2 decades of Alex's 36-year professional career has been dedicated to growing energy efficiency and other clean energy technology deployment in 14 Asian markets. Mr. Limaye is president and CEO of SRC Global Incorporation and is internationally recognized as a pioneer and entrepreneur with over 45 years of experience in energy efficiency and energy services. And Dr. Timothy is the executive director of the National Association of Energy Service Companies. In this role, he manages the representation of its members' energy service companies. Finally, I would like to inform that you can send us your questions during the presentations using the dedicated icon, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Please do not forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. And with that, I will now like to give the floor to Søren. Søren, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aris. Good. Thank you all for joining us today for the launch of our book on the incorporation of ESCOs in nationally determined contributions. I'm sure you all remember that these days, 5 years ago, we concluded the Paris Agreement on climate change, and all were thrilled with the submissions that we also had, and we got all countries on board. And the idea then, as now, is that countries are supposed to submit nationally determined contributions, indicating the efforts that each country is going to produce in order to reach the global target to keep temperatures below 2 degrees increase centigrade by the end of this century. The NDCs that were submitted together with the Paris Agreement, or in support of the Paris Agreement back in 2016, are far from what we would need if we intend to keep that goal. The recent emissions gap report that came out from UNEP just last week, in fact, the 2020 version, shows that we are 15 gigatons away from meeting that target just for the 2-degree, and that is for the submissions that we have, and 32 gigatons away from the 1.5-degree goal. And even that, we can see that for those commitments that countries have made, the policies that are supporting those commitments are even falling short of those commitments. So we are a very far distance from meeting what we have actually set out to do with just a 2-degree target. And if anyone thinks that the COVID-19 is doing anything to change that picture, the gap report will also tell you that it does not. If we look over the past 30 years, we can also see that the efficiency gains do not keep up with economic growth and population growth. We can see that the emissions per capita have been growing on a global scale, even if there are national accounts that show that some countries at least are able to reduce the carbon footprint and the energy consumption per capita while the economies are growing. And that is not because energy efficiency is difficult or because there's no potential. In fact, there's a lot of potential. If we look at this graph here, you would see that all emissions above the thin black line there are, in fact, emissions from energy that is totally wasted. When this energy has never been used, it's just heat that is lost. Below the black line, there are even further options for improving efficiency, maybe 20, 30, 40%. And I would claim that if we were able to use our energy resources efficiently, we would in fact not have a climate change problem at all. So energy efficiency is far from delivering on its potential. And when we tried out with the Kyoto Protocol 20 years ago to put in place the flexible mechanisms, the CDM and the JI, we can see that only 11% of the projects then were in fact energy efficiency projects, and only 8% of the reductions were produced from energy efficiency projects. And that's despite that ESCOs, that the energy efficiency is producing some of the best returns on investment. We can see in NDCs, as they are currently looking, energy efficiency is a focus of only a third. It's mentioned by practically all, but it's not a focus area. And that somehow illustrates what we all know and have known for the past 30 years, that everybody talks about the potential of energy efficiency, but in practice, very little is happening. And maybe not surprising, then ESCOs are in fact not a focus in any of the NDCs. So with our book launch today, we want to bring the ESCO onto the national NDC agendas. We simply want to make sure that it's not overlooked as we feel that it's been in the past. And we want to bring forward the best ESCO expertise and experience to support that endeavor. And we've done that in the book that we are launching today. And you can see the link here. If you download the presentation or we send it to you, you have the link also for the book here. So generally in the global ESCO network, we believe that ESCOs are the instrument that makes energy efficiency potentials tangible. It's a practical approach that countries can adopt. The book will tell experiences on how exactly to do that. We also believe that ESCOs have been overlooked in international climate change advice. We are working in UNEP DTU and in the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency and in the global ESCO network to bring attention to the ESCO in international climate change advice and negotiations. We also believe that ESCOs offer the best returns of investment on any climate change motivated action. And that is sort of the other side of the COVID-19 situation here. We believe that ESCOs, in fact, with a lot of the activities that ESCOs are generating, that it is in fact an excellent opportunity to build back better, simply because ESCOs are in many cases quite labor-intensive efforts. That's it's from me now. Visit us at the globalesconetwork.org and see more about our organization, and of course also to find the publication. Thank you very much, and over to you, Aris.
Thank you very much, Søren, for your presentation. Now I'll give the floor to Pierre. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aris. So thank you very much for attending this webinar, and thank you, Søren, for the great introduction. I will have the honor to start that presentation by essentially introducing the ESCO concept and the role of private and public sectors in such activity. So as we all know, energy efficiency has been not as used as it could, and ESCOs have been created essentially because of that focus of that situation. Energy efficiency projects are financially viable. They are technically feasible, but they're just not implemented. And because of that, a certain number of organizations decided to create a concept that was essentially tap on those savings to repay back investment that are needed to generate them, and create some kind of different models that would enable end user to benefit from these energy efficiency projects. So the concept dates for quite a long time, actually from the early 1980s. Was a concept really launched, but it dates a little bit even further back, as the concept has been initiated early in Europe in the 1900s. It was really launched by the 1980s, essentially in Canada, USA, and at some point in Europe and Asia a little bit later by the end of the 80s. And at the start, it was an important focus on the public market, as government buildings were using that mechanism to reduce their energy consumption, but at the time, as the environment was not the main focus, essentially reduce their energy costs and the burden on their budget. By the 1990s, there was a shift to guaranteed savings in North America and Europe, where guaranteed savings was essentially not providing the needed financing because government were able to finance the project, but they were looking for a mechanism that could deliver those savings. And the concept essentially grew quite a lot at that time, but still, there was a limited growth in these countries, and obviously in the others that were not using the concept, for a lot of the same reason that we're finding today about the limited growth of the concept. Well, non-adapted working legal system, the absence of government leadership in using that mechanism, a lack of consumer awareness, what you will hear very often about energy performance contracting, is just too good to be true, and you just don't understand how something can pay itself back only by the savings generated, and sometimes even leaving part of those savings for immediate cash flow benefit to the end user. Limited access to adapted financing mechanisms, and we'll talk a little bit, quite a lot today, about the need for financing to enable EPC to work. And issues with measurement and verification of savings, which obviously is the case for any energy efficiency project. If you're not able to measure it, you're not able to manage it. And the measurement of the absence of something, which is energy efficiency, has always been a challenge, and it still is a little bit today, even though the concepts are quite well known and demonstrated. So over the years, many types of ESCOs have been developed. Some of them in the private sector, some of them in the public sector. And as you will see throughout these presentations, one of the things that we can recall about ESCOs is that they're very flexible as far as the mechanism, as far as the actors that compose that environment, and as far as clients that can benefit from their services. So in the private sector, for example, you have totally independent ESCOs, organizations that were created only with the purpose to be an ESCO, and actually only work in the field of activities. But we have also other organizations that use the EPC mechanism and work as ESCOs for some of the benefits they can gain, not only by the projects themselves, but by other complementary benefits they can get. For example, equipment manufacturers who can sell their equipment, utility companies that can use energy efficiency for their planning, for peak reduction, or for the capacity to offer more energy to customer, essentially because they reduce the global consumption of others. Or energy or engineering companies who see an opportunity to sell their services, their knowledge to clients, and offering them in a different way that enables to deliver energy efficiency. In the public sector, interestingly, ESCOs has also been developed either for internal benefit, so creating an ESCO to bundle and all these projects in the public sector, or super ESCOs that will essentially become facilitators between financing mechanisms and end users, and will use the powers of the public sector capacity, financing of added value to serve the market in a place where they feel there's a gap. So as you see, there's a lot of different actors and a lot of different models. And as far as models that have been used, well, obviously these models have been adapted to the type of ESCOs that they are, as well as their client. So you'll see in a nutshell, essentially 4 combinations that exist. The private ESCOs who work with public client, we find that quite often through national tendering program, FEMP in the US being a very good example. We have equivalent in Canada, and there's others in Europe, where essentially governments tender the projects specifically dedicated to ESCOs, where they either want their technical capacity to deliver through a guaranteed saving mechanism, or sometimes they request as well a financing capacity where government do not want to get involved in that field and request ESCOs not only to deliver on the savings, but as well finance the projects. There's also the private ESCO to private client, which is a natural market, obviously, and not one that's so regulated. Interestingly, it's not the one that's been the biggest growth in North America and Europe. We've seen a lot of public client sector development, but private sector has still been a little bit limited, and that's where there's a huge need for financing, obviously, because private clients very often would request such financing and not want to use their own balance sheet to finance the projects. The public ESCO to the public sector has been an interesting development as well, because procurement limitations are often in the way to use ESCOs, and it makes things quite difficult for different entities within a government to launch tenders to actually hire ESCOs. So when you have a public ESCO, very often you forget this aspect of tendering, because public sector to public sector, they can offer direct contracting. And that public ESCO can, at that time, potentially go back to the private sector through a tendering process, but then you have a very developed entity who's able to manage these kind of activities. And then you have the public ESCO to the private sector, which is so far a limited structure, but would favor a super ESCO model where you could have blended finance between the government and private sector, still have a public ESCO entity, and then work on the private sector side to offer a new approach that can benefit them. So essentially, what I wanted to share with you at the beginning of this presentation is that ESCOs are very flexible as far as type of organization and as far as market they can address. In the context that we need to address climate change mitigation, in the context as well that we recognize that the role of energy efficiency to achieve such goals, and it's very well underdeveloped at this time, and in the context as well of the important financial crisis that will likely emerge from the COVID situation, then ESCOs have a very interesting role to play, not only to achieve climate change reduction, but also to create jobs and to create financial activities that will be greatly needed to get out of all these crises. So there's definitely a very big interest to use energy performance contracting in the wide variety of type that can be used, and likely this concept of EPC will grow, and ESCOs will be able to play an increasing role in many countries in the years to come by providing added value services, new innovations in market development, and energy efficiency to end users for the benefit of both the financial side as well as the environmental side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre, for an excellent overview in a very short time period. You made some excellent points that I would like to follow up on. As Pierre has pointed out, the ESCOs have a major role to play, and as Søren has pointed out, they can make a major contribution towards the climate change goals. But as we all know, the role of ESCOs is limited by many barriers. Now, as Pierre pointed out, and I won't repeat this, there is a wide range of types of energy service providers, and he mentioned several types, and they use a wide range of models, energy engineering services, financial services, performance contracting, and outsourced energy management. These models have been used in different ways in different countries, but all of them, we recognize, face a number of issues in getting themselves to the point where they can make major contributions
to the growth of energy efficiency implementation and contributions to the climate change mitigation. There is a role for governments, as Pierre pointed out. Many of the successful ESCOs in countries that have achieved great ESCO markets have been supported by a number of government actions. And our belief is that there is a major role for government in promoting energy efficiency in terms of providing incentives for efficiency, developing the appropriate policies and programs, and stimulating market development. And in that latter part, a key item is to develop and grow the energy services markets in which ESCOs have a major role to play. And in doing that, we want to create sustainable project development and commercial financing in the long term, and actually get the private sector, banks and financial institutions to come to the table and provide financing. So what I'm going to talk about is the need for governments to lead by example by engaging their public sectors into the energy efficiency game and to engage ESCOs in providing appropriate services to make energy efficiency happen in the public sector. And that often then creates the market and allows ESCO to function in the public sector and grow to the point that they can offer services also to the private sector. So what are the opportunities and barriers in the public sector with respect to ESCOs? First of all, we all know that there are tremendous opportunities in the public sector for improving energy efficiency. Most public sector entities are limited with financing issues. Their equipment is outdated, it has not properly been maintained, and they need to figure out ways to improve their efficiency. But they do not have the technical expertise or the ability to make things happen, which is why ESCOs have a role to play. So public sector needs implementation assistance from ESCOs. But as we all know, there are a number of important barriers to ESCOs. So the road to success faces many, many barriers. Some of these are well identified in our paper in the book, but just to summarize very quickly, public procurement regulations limit the ability of ESCOs to provide proper services because public procurement requires the low bidder, which is not necessarily a good way to go forward for efficiency. Many public agencies cannot sign multiple-year contracts, so they cannot pay from savings, which is a major element of the ESCO services model. There are limits on retaining savings, so if a public agency saves energy and reduces costs, their budget is reduced next year, so they cannot use the savings to pay for the services provided by ESCOs. There is very limited internal capacity to implement or manage ESCO contracts, and financing is very difficult to obtain for many ESCOs. Furthermore, in many government agencies, there are separate budgeting organizations for capital budgets and operating budgets. And investing money requires capital budget expenditures, savings go to the operating budgets, and they don't quite often work together to make things happen properly. So our paper, which focuses on World Bank's international experience in looking at public markets and how energy efficiency can be promoted in these markets. And we have essentially come up with a set of government actions that will foster and promote the development of ESCOs. And we are essentially looking at three major pillars of a set of government actions. First, to create a large and stable demand for energy services projects in the public sector, because ESCOs require a certain amount of investment to get started. Unless they see that there is a demand for their services, not just today, but also in the longer term, they will not make those investments and will not be created and function. Secondly, remove the barriers to public procurement of energy efficiency services. These are some of the barriers I pointed out in the previous slide, which make it very difficult for ESCOs to enter into contracts with public agencies. And third, facilitate the adequate and affordable financing of ESCO projects. Generally, ESCOs, particularly the ones that are new in a market that is not very mature, find it very difficult to get banks and commercial financial institutions to provide financing for ESCO projects. So very quickly, let's take each of these three pillars and see what can be done. So in terms of creating a demand for ESCO services, first step would be to increase the knowledge and awareness of the ESCO model and energy efficiency opportunities in the public agencies. Increase their capacity by helping them with technical assistance to identify the opportunities for ESCOs to participate. In some cases, require public agencies to establish energy efficiency targets and action plans. This has been done in some of the countries that have had successful ESCO markets developed. Help the ESCO industry by developing standardized templates for contracts and other terms, M&V, measurement and verification, and energy efficiency benchmarks. Organize workshops to get the public agencies, as I call them PAs, to work with ESCOs. Aggregate and bundle projects to reduce the transaction costs and create a financing mechanism that can provide larger amounts of financing, which may interest the banks and commercial institutions. And develop and implement the accreditation or certification of ESCOs to help improve their credibility in all markets. With respect to removing the barriers to procurement, we need to have the public agency be able to sign multiple-year contracts. This has been done in many countries. The United States and Canada are very good examples of this. So by regulation or executive order, public agencies are allowed to sign multiple-year contracts. Allow for the retention of energy cost savings to pay the ESCOs. We need to have the ability, the public agencies, when they save energy and save money, that money can be used in the future to pay for the ESCO services. Change the procurement rules so you don't always want to select the least cost bidder, because the least cost provider may not be the most efficient or the most valuable provider. So change that to most value. Select the most value through net present value or some other mechanism. Exclude ESCO payments from public agency debt. In some countries, we have worked, the payments to the ESCOs are considered public debt, and many local agencies, municipalities in particular, have borrowing limits, and they've already reached their borrowing limits, so they cannot borrow money. And if the public agency's debt is considered, or contracts with ESCOs are considered as debt, it becomes very difficult. Now, there is a movement in the European market where Eurostat has published a way to exclude these ESCO payments and characterize them not as public debt. Require consumption-based billing. Quite often, billing is done not on energy consumption, but on square footage or some other area. And encourage the models such as equipment leasing and the use of simple ESCO models. In terms of financing, the next speaker will go into more details on this, but very quickly, establishing revolving funds that will help public agencies obtain money to do the energy efficiency projects, do energy services agreements, provide grants as appropriate, risk sharing is another important area, and the ability to forfeit, that is to actually buy out the ESCO contracts, the cash flows from ESCO contracts, to allow ESCOs to use the money for other projects in the future. And finally, as Pierre mentioned, public or super ESCOs may also have a role to play, and the governments can encourage doing that. We have developed an energy efficiency financing ladder, and the ladder steps go from government involvement to commercial financing. We all want to get to the point, to the top of the ladder with advanced commercial financing provided by banks or financial institutions. But to get there, it's not that simple. We need to take several steps in between. And again, I will let Alex discuss some of these financing options and opportunities. But we want to point out that the financing opportunities and issues are very, very important for ESCO development. Now, given all that, we have found that many countries have done different types of measures to help foster their ESCO markets. And I won't read through this entire chart, it is in the book. But countries like Germany, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria, UK, Armenia, Croatia, and India have established different approaches to encourage and promote the ESCO market. So in conclusion, if a government is interested in developing the energy services market, which they should be, considering the previous speaker's points about how energy efficiency is a major tool to meet the climate goals, the steps are a roadmap, as I call it: identify and assess the current market, conduct stakeholder consultations, create the demand for energy efficiency services, remove barriers for public procurement, facilitate financing, and develop and test simple procurement models to get the market started and go to more complex models later. This is kind of a roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dilip, for your thorough presentation. Now our next speaker is Alex. And Alex, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Aris. I think the previous speakers, Pierre and Dilip, did a fantastic job that I think I can speak less, hopefully, through my slide. I was excited when Dilip said I'll go through all financial mechanisms. I think the next 10 minutes, I'll just focus on public financial mechanisms. I wear the hat of the newly created Asia-Pacific ESCO Industry Alliance, and we have the country ESCO associations of China, India, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, and Thailand. And I also wear our investment hat, Climergy, and my colleague, Mikhail Yado, is part of the team that wrote this paper. So let's step back. And in looking at the IEA's efficient world scenario by 2040, the whole global economy will have to mobilize something like $24.5 trillion. And it is my opinion that 2/3 of this will have to flow outside the balance sheet of the building or end user. And only 1/3 of it, like $8 trillion, will go through the business as usual, self-finance, debt finance, and lease finance. So that means that the lion's share of $16.5 trillion will have to flow through ESCO performance contracts and other innovative mechanisms, PPP transactions, risk-sharing facilities, budget financing, and other modalities. But what is the role of the public sector? It's really to create scale in the business as usual side, to ramp up and create demand as part to contribute to the 8 trillion capital gap, but also to design and implement innovative off-balance sheet mechanisms to contribute to the 2/3 share of $16.5 trillion. So the public sector indeed has a huge role to play. And I'm just going to drop and breeze through a few slides showing the common mechanisms. First is the utility programs. I think many markets have had 3 decades of experience using public utility customer relationships to reduce customer credit risk by collecting ESCO payments through the monthly billing mechanism. So it's a very, very common, effective, many demand-side management, many ESCO contracts. This, in fact, led many public utilities to create their ESCO subsidiaries, if not engaging or outsourcing ESCO services. Another is, this was very, very much highlighted as a barrier by Dilip. When many public agencies are able or unable to contract energy performance services or the ESCO. So it's about allowing many of the public entities to engage ESCOs and ESCOs raising their own finance. And Dilip did a fantastic job mentioning what the common barriers and how these barriers could be knocked down. We have cases where government-owned energy efficiency service providers have evolved as either a public ESCO or a super ESCO or both. So the very complicated chart on the left side of the screen, you see super ESCO functioning both as a super ESCO to private ESCOs and as a public ESCO for public facilities. And in this situation, we have to be very careful that whatever government entity or public ESCO we create, it does not crowd out the private ESCOs. It does not rob business from them, but in fact should support them with either financing, debt or equity, and technical assistance or capacity building. Then there's the role of the international financial institutions and multilateral development banks by flowing long-term concessional financing, blending their sub-commercial debt and equity with seed capital from government to create a financing facility and being able to push money now at sub-commercial terms, longer tenors, and lower interest pricing. So you see the examples of the Shandong Green Development Fund in China and the Green Climate Fund of Haiti, where the lower financing indeed removed some barriers and allowed ESCO markets to scale up. And then we have this other model of budget financing where energy efficiency capital is recovered through a budget mechanism from either the finance ministry or a budget management agency of government that's holding and releasing energy budgets, whether it be on oil, gas, or electricity, and using those cash flows to finance ESCO payments. So this is another mechanism that would help grow the ESCO market using budget reflows as a mechanism to collect and provide ESCO payments. Dilip did mention energy efficiency revolving fund, and I'd like to mention a specific case in Thailand. They did create one of these energy efficiency revolving fund where an IFI blended with seed capital from government collected out of new oil levy, and they flow the very concessional, close to 0% interest loans to as many as 11 banks. And then at some point, at a later phase, I think in the 5th phase, they were doing direct lending to ESCOs as well. And so you see the revolving funds as one of the mechanisms that allows businesses to recapitalize. You get the money coming back to the pot and being reinvested in a new batch or new phase of projects. So this provides a sustainable or recycling of the funding for future projects. There are more financial mechanisms, and in the interest of time, I cannot go through the others, but there are in fact more innovative structures where private sector can come in through PPP transactions and joint venture agreements. But let me zero in on 11 quick recommendations. First is to do market assessments. Try to understand how big or how small the public sector and private sector ESCO markets are. Next, it's to allocate resources, either get development capital or government appropriations or other climate funding to prepare projects. And usually the more expensive investment grade or detailed energy audits is one cost barrier that is not often thought of. Next, it's to build accreditation, build capacities in the ESCO sector. And in many markets, there are countries that have discontinued or do not have ESCO accreditation systems. The fourth would be to assess the environment for private sector commercial lending or government lending to ESCOs and assess the role of IFIs and multilateral development banks to de-risk such lending to allow these financial institutions to scale up their energy efficiency lending exposure. Dilip did mention the procurement regulations to allow multi-year contracts and other barriers such as being able to retain savings and being able to procure ESCO contracts, which are neither non-pure goods nor pure non-pure services. So it is a barrier in many country markets. Six, it's to create innovative vehicles. So this is where the equity and guarantee funds come in, the super ESCOs, the PPP transactions, and the joint venture agreements to flow not only private sector know-how, but also private sector capital in public sector projects. A roadmap, and this is true in many markets, a roadmap to accelerate the phase out of energy subsidies. The presence of energy subsidies as they persist is a barrier to private sector investments in portfolios of ESCO projects. So you get a better after-tax IRR in countries that have totally phased out energy subsidies. I'll give you an example. In Southeast Asia, only 2 of the 10 economies have succeeded in phasing out energy subsidies, and that's Philippines and Singapore. So the other 8 economies are still struggling to phase out energy subsidies, although there are continued efforts, and then they are on the. I think they're all in the right track, but we don't know exactly when they would reach zero subsidies. Next is it's all about implementing incentives structures to improve after-tax returns of portfolio investments to see how what tax holidays. And it's difficult when governments are tightening the belt in rationalizing fiscal incentive programs. So you see imbalances right now when renewable energy gets even more incentives than energy efficiency in many markets. The ninth would be to see if training and certification programs do exist and build international partnerships where possible. 10th, it's to create and build that confidence among stakeholders, especially the financiers, the investors, and the end users, to make sure that the ESCO markets do grow. And I think most relevant to at times, my last recommendation is, accelerate public spending towards energy efficiency, like the next 10 years of public building retrofits, insulation, air conditioning, lighting improvements, street lighting, water pumping, and traffic signal replacements, for example. Accelerate the next 10-year program into the next 3 years. And we have seen that in certain country markets, job generation is more labor intensive than the typical infrastructure projects. So accelerating public spending would not only beef up the ESCO market, but would be very good for the economy. So I thank you, and looking forward to your questions later in the Q&A. Back to you, Aris.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your presentation. And according to the agenda, the next speaker is Timothy. Timothy is the last speaker before the Q&A session. So, Timothy, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to various people on the webinar today. It's great to be here with you. I really was fascinated by the previous presentations. As the last speaker on the agenda, it's kind of interesting to get to kind of see the wrap-up of all the previous speakers. Pierre, when he talked about the history of the industry really getting grounded in the 1980s, I can remember when I was in elementary school in the 70s, that my teacher told me I would work in an industry that didn't exist when he spoke that, which the ESCO industry did not exist at that time, and so that's true. And then on to Dilip with the market growth and the expansion on how that has to happen. In the United States, the laws of each state had to be passed in order to allow ESCOs to come in and do their savings work and have that multi-year guarantee on the contracts. That development really helped grow the market, but it took many years and lots of work to get it passed. We have effectively every state and then the federal government of the United States operate differently. And then finally, with the financing, such a key portion that Alexander talked about, the industry just doesn't exist without financing. But that financing now is where we see some of the growth and innovation going forward. So I'll go ahead and talk about how we see ESCO growth. We have the foundation set by Pierre, the financing and the structure set by Dilip and Alexander. Now I'll talk about what actually causes growth. And I'll use the US market to talk about the growth we saw in the ESCO industry in the United States as an example. What is the driver for US ESCO projects? Some might think that it's technology. And sometimes it does seem that way, but other drivers propelled the US market for ESCOs. So I'll spend a few minutes explaining this equivocal answer. First, I need to sketch the size and the shape of the US ESCO market to put some context around my remarks about technology. But we think that US ESCOs implement about $7 billion of US money projects each year. The National Association of Energy Service Companies, my organization, and the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory are currently confirming this estimate with a market survey of ESCO companies going forward. Our projects are comprehensive, including more than 120 different measures, according to the Lawrence Berkeley database of almost 6,000 projects. energy efficiency, customer-sided renewable energy, demand response, and resilience, cybersecurity, and microgrids. Almost all the customers for U.S. ESCO projects are government agencies, ranging from the largest military bases and state university campuses to small rural school districts. Our projects' average size varies by market segment, but are pretty large in comparison to projects in other countries. Federal government projects average more than $20 million US, and school districts average about $1.5 million. Most of our projects are performance contracts, which means that the energy service companies guarantee the cost of the project will be paid from savings over a period of 10 to 25 years, which means that if the project does not perform according to expectations, the ESCO is required to come in and repay the savings difference back to the customer. Financing comes from a very competitive private marketplace, which includes everything from local banks to major institutions like insurance companies and even pension funds. We think that there's two market drivers in the United States government. Government mandates are one, and the desperate need for capital to address an estimated $1 trillion in deferred maintenance and equipment replacement needs in public facilities. The federal government and most of the state governments have enacted energy savings mandates, and these are often accompanied by aggressive targets for greenhouse gas reduction. 80% by 2030 is typical, which we know can be largely met with energy efficiency. The mandates, however, usually have no funding attached. At the same time, many of our public facilities have been starved for maintenance and capital improvements funds for decades, and the meager appropriations that are available are eliminated by periodic recessions and other government fiscal crises. Performance contracting with an ESCO offers a lifeline to government facility and financial managers because it simply repurposes money that the school or hospital is currently spending on wasted energy and the maintenance of decrepit equipment into a payment stream for energy savings replacement equipment. So back to my original question, is technology really not a driver in the US ESCO market? The beneficial effect of technology on the market does seem to come in waves. Each successive wave of technology will build, come to a crest, and then break as a single technology. Low overhead cost vendors will learn to compete with ESCOs, but the ESCO market keeps growing rather than fading because ESCOs have learned that their competitive advantage is building on in their business skills, their ability to understand and integrate the best features of their competition to deliver what customers want. The first wave of the US ESCO market was the replacement of T12 fluorescent lamps and magnetic ballasts with electronic ballasts and T8 bulbs. The retrofit cut lighting use in half and delivered better quality lighting in the mid-1980s. ESCO virtually were the only companies that knew this technology. After that, we saw us move into heating, ventilation, and air conditioning retrofits, and then finally into solar photovoltaics. As each of these technologies came and crested and then left, we saw ESCOs move on and grow their market share. The key things that ESCOs learned through these phases was that they had to include strategies like targeted marketing and sales management. They couldn't just go market their efforts to anybody. They had to make sure they had solid performers and people that would really be interested in their project. Having specific contracts and construction management was key. And finally, having a strict project measurement and savings verification process was key to the growth in our ESCO market in the United States. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Timothy, for your interesting presentation. And with that, I would like to initiate the Q&A session. And the Q&A session will be handled by my colleague, Søren Lütken. So, Søren?
Thank you very much, Aris. And if I could ask everyone to put on your cameras. We have, in fact, not more than 5 minutes for a Q&A here. So maybe it's fortunate that we don't have that many questions. There is none right now from the audience, but of course we have prepared ourselves. So let me just start with one question to get things going, and I think that's addressed to everybody here. What are the most important lessons learned from countries that have successfully established and promoted ESCOs? I think that can go for everyone. Who wants to go first?
Well, I can try, Søren, as I was the first speaker. I can go first as well on the Q&A. Well, I think the most important thing is going to be, well, there's a lot actually, but it's probably financing at this point. ESCOs can deliver on the technical side, and that's their real value in bringing energy efficiency to the table. On the other end, access to financing always is an issue for end user, would it be private sector or public sector. And I think developing flexible mechanism and adapted mechanism that fit the country needs, the ESCO needs, and the client needs will become, well, has been at some point the key, coming either from government or private sector, and will still be the key to enable the sector to develop furthermore.
I would like to add to that, if it's okay.
Sure.
One of the most important things that we have learned is that each country is different. The legislative, regulatory, and the energy services markets are quite different in each country. So governments need to have a strategy and a plan as to how they want to include scaling up of energy efficiency using the ESCO model. And that strategic plan needs to then address some of the barriers, figure out ways to overcome the barriers, and then develop essentially, as I said, a roadmap to move forward. And much can be learned from the success of some of the countries that have developed large ESCO markets, US, Canada, China, India, and others. So we can learn from the international experience and adapt it to the specific country situation to move forward with a strategy and a plan. I think governments need to take an active role in doing that. Thank you.
Sorry, I'd like to just quickly add, I think one of the successful factors in transforming markets, especially ESCO markets, it's a solid partnership between government and industry. And I think industry, so that can take many forms, right? Whether you form an advisory council, whether they're good consultations, but industry on its side will have to have a very good collective position through, and this is usually through the ESCO association. You've got to have a very active ESCO association that's able to collect the views of industry. So that is long-term factors to developing the ESCO market.
And I guess I'll bring up the end of this is I think it's right. When we think about the markets, the financing is critical, the technical is critical, the structure and make sure there's a business model that works is critical. But one of the things we find in the United States that's one of our barriers that we always have to overcome is the people's resistance that the project really works, that the savings are real, and that they'll accumulate those savings over a multi-year project. And so we talk about that as the business issues, the financial issues, the technical issues, and the people issues. We often think that the technical issues are often the easiest ones to solve because we all have the technical expertise available. We've built a healthy financial market in the United States. And for the business issues, we've got state laws and structures that work now. It's really sometimes the people's reluctance to move and make things happen.
Thanks, Tim. I think, in fact, there's no new questions from the floor. Shall we do just one last to close things off? And maybe we should do that now. Everybody talks about Corona. Maybe we should do the same thing here just to end. Has there been a country-level effort to compare energy efficiency or ESCO job generation impacts with those of other post-COVID-19 economic stimulus activities? And I think that's for all of you also.
Well, I'll start again, and I will say that I'm based in Canada, and we actually try to develop something like that to demonstrate that business as usual can generate a certain number of jobs, and by bringing ESCOs in the field and adapted financing, we can grow the actual economic activity quite a lot, because these projects will likely not happen without such mechanism. So we developed that, and it was quite significant in the decision of the government to develop the first super ESCO in Canada that will be done in Quebec. So I think demonstration can be made because these projects will not happen otherwise. So it's quite easy at some point to demonstrate the jobs creation that can go that can be generated out of this kind of initiative.
Thanks. Alex, will you have a go on this one also, or I know you have to run?
Certainly. Well, in aid of legislation in the Philippines for economic stimulus bills, the energy efficiency industry here did a economic model that showed after serving many energy efficiency projects that every $1 million of stimulus funding was can create and has created 37.5 jobs for every $1 million invested. And that includes most of that would be in the ESCO industry, and some of that would be in upstream manufacturing, assembly, and even through the life of ESCO contracts, the O&M. And then we started to compare with the normal infrastructure projects, the road projects, the other water and power projects, which were averaging 25 jobs per $1 million. So we were able to demonstrate to legislators that energy efficiency was creating 45% more jobs for the same amount of stimulus funding than normal infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Alex. Anybody else want to go?
Yes, in the United States, our main push today is that we would combine the efficiency with government stimulus money, that we would effectively get for every dollar invested by the government for stimulus, we could add between $4 and $10 to that of matching efficiency funds that would take a project and grow the government stimulus by a factor of 4 to 10 times.
Just a quick closing comment. I think we as the Global ESCO Network should try to promote the whole concept that post-COVID economic recovery can best be one of the best methods to promote that based on the economic, environmental, and other benefits would be through the efficiency and therefore the ESCO model. By the way, I had to put in the chat a quick question for Timothy. I don't know whether you got that or not.
Yeah, I got that, Dilip, which is...
Well, simply, I asked him to briefly mention some of the very important measures taken by governments in the US over a period of almost 20 years that created this $7 billion industry to overcome some of the barriers that all of us talked about.
So the quick answer, since we're almost out of time, or we are out of time, is that establishing the structure and the rules, the laws that allow performance contracting to exist, had been one of the first key efforts. And then the government mandates that then cause actions that are needed to happen in state and local facilities is the second. And then one that wasn't actually purposeful was the reduction in spending in facilities to keep them active and alive caused a need to be developed. That wasn't purposeful, but that's what happened. And so the combination of the proper laws and structures that allows it to work, a financing market and the ability to perform in place, and then third, the reduction of spending in facilities that creates a deficit and a need to find additional funding was what caused that.
I would like to suggest that we, as the Global ESCO Network, put together a paper on all the different actions taken by the US federal and state governments that overcame all of the barriers we've talked about, because this will be a very important lesson to other countries to see what can be done, what has been done, and how it is worked. Maybe something for NASPO to think about. Thank you.
Thanks, Dilip. That's something to adopt for the next book.
Yes.
I want to thank everybody for attending our webinar today, and thank you to our speakers and co-authors of our book, The Incorporation of ESCOs in Nationally Determined Contributions. You can find it on our website, and Aris will, I'm sure, provide you with links, including links to the recorded version of the webinar today. So with these words, I thank you very much. You may visit us on the globalesconetwork.org and looking forward to welcoming you on future occasions. Thank you.